Rome, Italy, 44 BCE. The Ides and the Unyielding Tide.
I would rather be the first man in a village than the second man in Rome, Julius Caesar.
Theodore Langley stumbled out of the vortex, the hiss of his timepiece swallowed by the noise of ancient Rome, a city of marble and ambition. He inhaled deeply, breathing in the air rank with salt and olive oil. His mission was clear: to stop Caesar's assassination. Failure haunted him still, as a victim of the gunfire in Sarajevo that didn't save his father. The Great War had unfolded as if he had never been there, destined to ripple into the fate of his father and into an even greater war that reshaped the world. He held deep in his chest the memory of standing between the Archduke and his killer, when he bore a pain that paled in comparison to the realization that all of his research and foresight just wasn't enough. Perhaps the complexity of early 1900s politics had been too far ahead of history's tipping point. Here, in a world ruled by orators, Theodore had more control. He could persuade and negotiate, become a player, not a mere bystander. If he succeeded, he could rewrite the ending of history, preventing the tragedy he'd failed to stop in Sarajevo, and saving his father in the process. Theodore navigated the bustling streets, his sandals slapping against the cobblestones. He had studied every detail of this day: the conspirators, their motives, and the layout of the Senate. He knew that Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus led the plot, believing Caesar's rise threatened the Republic, but Theodore knew better. As he approached the theater of Pompey where the Senate convened, he spotted a group of senators huddled in whispered conversation. Among them was Brutus, his face betraying uncertainty even as Cassius spoke with steely resolve. Theodore's heart pounded as he stepped forward, calling out in the tongue of statesmen and orators as his father taught him.
Senator,
Theodore called out, striding toward Brutus.
verbum quaeso.
Brutus turned, his brow furrowing.
Novite, huc ne pertines?
Notum commune habemus.
Theodore improvised, stepping closer.
Hariolum, quid magno periculo hodie monuit?
Brutus's eyes narrowed.
Spurinnam dicis?
Ita,
Theodore said, recalling the seer's name from his studies.
exitum funestum praedixit, si Caesarat senatum veniret.
Theodore's words spilled forth, his Latin flowing as naturally as his breath. This was his father's language, a major language of history, law's fate, and men who believed their words alone could shape the world. It was also the language of a republic already crumbling, of orators whose speeches could not stop the march of empire. Theodore pressed on, his voice desperate.
Te putes pro salute Romae agere, sed quae secuntur non vides. Unum virum ferire paras, sed eo facto ipsam rem publicam interficies. Bellum civile orietur, cae des sine modo, non restituetur senatus, aboleri eum videbis.
Brutus paled, his breath hitching.
Id fieri non potest.
Theodore's voice wavered, desperation further seeping in.
Fit, res publica hac die morietur, brute, non propter Caesaris potentiam, sed propter eius casum.
Brutus glanced at his fellow conspirators, then back at Theodore.
Quid ergo me facere velis?
Conventum differ,
Theodore urged.
Caesarem persuade ne veniat. Si quide accidat, Roma in tumultum ruet.
Brutus hesitated, his gaze darting to Cassius, to the Senate doors, and back to Theodore. Theodore had spoken in the language of Rome, pleaded in the tongue of its politicians, negotiated with history with the words that had shaped empires, toppled kings, built and broken entire civilizations. For a moment, Brutus took Theodore's words to heart, for anyone speaking his own tongue so flawlessly deserved to be recognized. But he had little time to consider his options. Right then, a hush fell over the gathered senators. Caesar had arrived. The conspirators stiffened, hands drifting toward concealed daggers. For a moment, time slowed, and Theodore stood paralyzed, his mind racing. This was it. The moment that had defied him, a moment as unshakable as the fall of the Archduke. He had played his cards with history and warned its makers in their own language, but it wasn't enough. A hand grasped Caesar's shoulder, then another. The first blade struck. "No!" Theodore surged forward, shoving past stunned senators, reaching desperately for Caesar's arm. "Caesar," his Latin dissolved into raw, unrestrained English. "Beware!" History didn't listen. A second dagger buried itself in Caesar's side, followed by another. Chaos erupted as the conspirators closed in, their blades flashing in the dim torchlight. Caesar gasped, stumbling, his once pristine toga now marred with streaks of crimson. Theodore grabbed at the nearest assassin, wrenching his arm back, but before he could react, something else struck him. A sharp force drove into his side, suddenly and decisively. His breath hitched, pain flared white-hot in his ribs. Theodore staggered as he lost his footing, twisting to see an unfamiliar senator, face grim, already retreating into the chaos. Theodore could only watch as Caesar's end played out before him. Caesar coughed. Blood bubbled at his lips as he turned to Brutus. His body received the dagger while his voice escaped strained and disbelieving.
Et tu, Bruce?
Caesar collapsed at the foot of Pompey's statue, his body crumpling in a pool of his own blood. The Senate chamber, once filled with hushed anticipation moments before, now rang with the echoes of fleeing footsteps as the assassins scattered like rats from a sinking ship. Theodore clutched at his own wound, his fingers coming away slick with blood. He tried to move, trying to speak, but his body couldn't respond. Through the haze of moving bodies, he caught Brutus's gaze one last time. There was regret in it, but not enough. Brutus stood for only a second before falling in step with the retreating crowd. Theodore had thrown himself yet again into history's path, but history had cut him and Caesar down without hesitation. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he lay on his side beside the fallen ruler, just as what happened in Sarajevo. Failure gripped him colder than the stone beneath him, almost as cold as he felt when he learned his father would never return. His father's handwriting, scrawled on an old note from the chest of artifacts he had inherited, reading, "To my son, whom I trust will continue the tradition of stewardship for the sanctity of history." Theodore clutched the memory like a talisman. He had always thought it was his legacy to shape history, but now it felt like a curse, an inheritance that had doomed him not once, but now twice. Had his fascination with history ever been his own? Or had it been cultivated, set in motion by the father he had lost? By the ancestors he had never known? Had his father seen this fate coming? If history could be shaped, then why couldn't his father's fate be reshaped? Could Theodore even control his own fate? The questions rattled in his mind as the pain chilled through his body. But no answer would change the reality pressing down on him now. The blood pooled. The walls towered, and history moved forward. Indifferent, decisive, and unstoppable. Lying in the blood of his own and the former emperor, Theodore exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. He had convinced himself that history could be reasoned with, that knowledge and foresight granted him leverage over time itself. But here, in the halls where the Republic bled out, he saw the truth. History was not a debate to be won, nor a course to be gently redirected. It was a truly unyielding force, written not in words but in marble, steel, blood, and silence. He had bargained and reasoned with history, and in return, it struck him down with a dagger. With shaking fingers, he reached for his timepiece, blood-stained and scuffed, twisting back the tiny gears. The familiar comforting steam hissed through the brass tubes as the world blurred and the scene of Caesar's death dissolved into nothingness. The intense pain on his side dulled away as the sounds of car radios and color television repleted his senses. The sun was high, reflecting off steel and glass rather than marble and stone. The crowd had gathered, murmuring, excited. In a matter of minutes, history would lurch forward again, unyielding as ever. History continued to be an unyielding force, impervious to both impulsive action and careful negotiation. Even so, it still wasn't some sentient being. It still had a weakness, blindness. History saw what has already been written, but it never sees the hands that guided the pen. Theodore had tried to reason with it, to bend it to his will with words and actions, but now he saw the futility in that. If history could not be fought head-on or negotiated with, perhaps it could just be slipped past, unnoticed, like a shadow in a room too bright for anyone to see. Theodore was done fighting inevitability. Sarajevo had taught him the futility of simple action. Rome had taught him the futility of words. Here he would not warn. He would not argue. He would simply move in silence, unseen, altering details so subtly that history might not notice the shift. His mission wasn't lost. His father's life and the legacy he had entrusted to Theodore could still be salvaged, but the approach would have to change. No longer would Theodore stand at the crossroads of history to be a mere bystander or a negotiator. A new plan was forming in his mind, one that required patience, subtlety, and a dexterous touch. This time he would shape the course of events without ever truly touching them. His father had told him that history was not kind, but perhaps, if one moved quietly enough, it did not have to be cruel.